Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a tiny baby in Japan, sleeping soundly, not in a crib across the room, but like snuggled right up next to their parents all night long.
Mhm.
Or picture this. A family in rural Mexico with 7 kids, and the older siblings aren't locked in constant squabbles, but instead are, patient, kind, even acting as gentle caregivers for the younger ones. Does that sound different?
It absolutely does, yeah.
Maybe even surprising compared to what you might hear about raising kids today.
For sure. And these aren't just isolated anecdotes. They're glimpses into the incredible global diversity of parenting practices, the kind that authors Robert A. Levine and Sarah Levine explore in their intriguing book, Do Parents Matter? Why Japanese Babies Sleep Soundly, Mexican Siblings Don't Fight, and American Families Should Just Relax.
That title alone, wow, it throws down a gauntlet,
It
right?
really does.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're extracting the key insights from this cross-cultural journey to understand just how wildly parenting varies across the world and, well, through history too. Our mission is to get informed quickly, see multiple perspectives, challenge some common assumptions, especially those maybe fueling parental anxiety today, and hopefully give you a fresh perspective on what children truly need to thrive.
Yeah, we've spent time with this material, and we're ready to guide you through the most important points the Levines highlight, helping you see the big picture and the fascinating details.
So before we jump into specific cultural differences, maybe let's set the historical stage first. The book argues that the very idea of parenthood has gone through massive transformations over the long arc of human history. They point to 3 big shifts.
That's a great starting point, yeah. The first major shift began about 11,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture.
Okay.
This wasn't just about planting seeds. It profoundly changed family life. Parents became supervisors of child labor because children were crucial members of the home production team, tending fields or animals. Obedience wasn't just about discipline. It was seen as a sacred virtue, really necessary for the family's survival.
Right. The family was basically the unit of economic production back then.
Exactly. Then, around 250 years ago, the Industrial Revolution kicked off the second transformation.
Yeah.
Work moved out of the home and into factories and offices. Families migrated to urban centers. This period saw the rise of formal institutions like schools and healthcare systems, and as incomes rose, children's economic roles shifted dramatically.
And we're still living through aspects of this industrial transformation today, aren't we? With increasing urbanization globally.
We definitely are. The third major shift, which happened primarily in the 20th century, is the demographic transition.
This is huge, isn't it?
It's massive.
Yeah.
It's when medical and socioeconomic advances led to a dramatic drop in infant and child mortality rates.
Yeah, think about the U.S. In 1900, roughly, 1 in 10 babies didn't survive their first year?
That's right. And today, that number is drastically lower, thank goodness.
Oh, absolutely.
And this lower mortality rate fundamentally changed fertility. Families no longer needed to have many children just to ensure a few survived to adulthood.
Makes sense.
So these 3 transformations, agriculture, industrialization, demographic transition, they created incredibly different contexts for raising children, changing what was expected of parents and kids in different times and places.
Okay, so that historical backdrop is crucial because it helps explain the book's core, maybe its most radical, revelation. Parenting is profoundly cultural, not some universal script.
Exactly. This is the central argument the Levines build on. They show that what is considered standard or, normal child rearing in one society can be seen as totally unacceptable, illegal, or abnormal in another.
And they immediately hit you with powerful examples, like the contrast between child rearing among the Gusii in Kenya and the Yoruba in Nigeria.
Yes, the differences are stark, starting right with the physical environment. Gusii mothers often lived more isolated with their children in separate huts, while Yoruba mothers were part of these bustling compounds, constantly interacting with extended family.
But it's the goals of parenting that really differ, isn't it?
That's the key thing. Yoruba culture values sociability and gregariousness. Interactions are cheerful, often noisy. Children are encouraged to be outgoing.
Okay.
But in absolute contrast, the Gusii were reticent with people outside their immediate family group. Excessive sociability was actually seen as dangerous.
Wow.
And the parents explicitly told researchers their cultural goal was for their children to learn fear.
Fear? Really?
Not crippling anxiety, but a kind of cautious reticence. Think about that. Raising a child to be fearless and outgoing versus raising a child to be appropriately fearful and reserved. That's a fundamental difference in what parents are aiming
Yeah,
for.
it completely flips the script we often hear today about building confidence from day one.
Totally. Another fascinating example is how middle-class mothers in modern Japan and Taiwan handled toddlers' misbehavior.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, Heidi Feng's research described how Taiwanese mothers often deliberately sought out moments of misbehavior, past or present, to engage their toddlers in what they called opportunity education.
Opportunity education.
Jihujiou, yeah. This involved chastising and lengthy moral lectures, seen as building the learning relationship.
Okay, so kind of confronting it head on.
Right. But Japanese mothers had the opposite approach. They actively avoided confrontation with their toddlers, believing it would destroy the learning relationship.
Wow, completely opposite.
And what's wild is that the Taiwanese toddlers didn't seem upset by the lectures in the videos. They appeared kind of accustomed to them, seeing them as familiar interactions.
So these are sophisticated parents in modern developed nations.
Exactly.
Yet their fundamental beliefs about how children learn and what parents should do when kids misbehave are built on totally different cultural premises.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And this is where you have to pause and ask. If parenting practices vary this dramatically, can advice based primarily on Western, often American, psychological research truly offer universal rules?
Good question.
And is it fair to judge or blame parents when their practices might simply be different cultural norms?
Which leads us directly to the book's critique of some influential Western expert perspectives, particularly those rooted in psychiatry and specific interpretations of attachment theory.
Right. The Levines trace a shift in where parenting advice was coming from.
Yeah, it moved from pediatricians, who were primarily monitoring healthy child development across the whole population, to psychiatrists and psychoanalysts, who mainly saw children who were already presenting with problems.
Okay, so a different sample population.
A very different sample. And this created a perspective heavily focused on how parenting could lead to psychological problems. The book argues this gave rise to these exorbitant claims of psychological influence, frequently placing blame on parents, and especially mothers, for children's mental health issues.
They mentioned that historical concept, thankfully now discarded, of the schizophrenic mother.
Right, the idea that a mother's behavior could somehow cause schizophrenia.
This is just awful.
Terrible. And even though that specific idea was debunked, the book suggests these ideas cast a long shadow, maybe influencing current advice, like the strong emphasis on avoiding any form of harshness with young children. Then there's the critique of the Bowlby-Ainsworth attachment theory, or at least certain, perhaps rigid interpretations of it.
Okay.
The core idea being that insensitive mothering leads to insecurely attached babies, which is predicted to result in later emotional disturbance.
And they cite that U.S. study from '97 that found, was it 38%?
Yeah, 38% of one-year-olds were classified as insecurely attached. Some experts interpreted this as evidence of a potential epidemic of future emotional problems.
An epidemic. Wow.
But the book raises the cross-cultural challenge. Does this model universally predict outcomes? They mention psychologist Jerome Kagan's skepticism about the idea that specific early childhood experiences have these strong, lasting, and predetermined connections to adult psychological outcomes. Kagan highlights other powerful influences like, innate temperament, ongoing brain maturation, and the child's changing social and environmental context.
So not just the parent-child diet in isolation.
Exactly. Kagan suggests the burden of proof really lies with those claiming this strong, enduring link, because the research, well, it isn't as conclusive as some might think.
Right.
So what this critique suggests, according to the book's analysis, is that children are likely far more resilient and adaptable than some expert advice implies.
That's interesting.
And parents may have less absolute long-term power over their children's ultimate psychological trajectory than is often claimed by models focused so narrowly on early parent-child interactions.
That alone is a potentially anxiety-reducing idea for many parents listening, I think.
I think so too.
So let's get into the specifics of some of these cultural variations, starting right at the beginning. Infancy and early care. Pregnancy and birth, for example, look incredibly different.
Oh yeah, the cultural perceptions are remarkable. Do you see women in Kenya, despite having multiple children, claim to detest pregnancy?
Really?
detest it.
Yeah, they complain of nausea and difficulty working, which the researchers suggest might have been partly an exaggeration due to fear of witchcraft and ill will if
Yeah.
they showed how much they desired children.
Okay, a cultural reason.
Compare that to the Western idea of the bloom of pregnancy.
Yeah.
Totally different framing.
Completely. And birth itself.
Well, among the Tibetan Buddhist Zangskar in India, mothers and newborns are considered socially polluting and are secluded.
No.
In rural Nepal, a Hindu father might not even see his newborn until an astrologer determines the child wasn't born under a sign hostile to him.
Gosh, so many different beliefs.
And the ways different cultures manage difficult births are also diverse. The Gusi have elaborate ritual seclusion for breech births, keeping mother and baby warm and close to the placenta, which, interestingly, kind of resembles modern kangaroo care practices for premature babies.
That is interesting.
Mayan midwives developed these highly skilled massage techniques aimed at preventing breech births.
It makes you really question a simple linear view of medical progress, doesn't it? These different approaches have developed within their own rich systems of knowledge and belief.
Exactly. Moving on to feeding practices, the contrast is equally striking. Think about the mid-20th century U.S.
Okay.
There was significant modesty and even shame around breastfeeding, particularly in the middle class. A Boston survey in the early 1950s found 60% of mothers didn't breastfeed at all,
60%.
and many who did stopped quickly. This was strongly linked to Victorian-era taboos about the female body.
Right. And meanwhile, in places like among the Yoruba in Nigeria,
Totally different. Breastfeeding was universal, done publicly without any fuss, and lasted for an average of 2 years. No attention, no anxiety, just normal.
huh?
It's important to note, though, as the book does, that not all traditional practices were adaptive or beneficial. They mention past practices in parts of Africa involving force-feeding gruel, which could be dangerous.
Okay, yeah, that's a crucial point. It pushes back against any romantic idea that all folk practices are automatically good.
Definitely.
All right, let's talk about sleep, since it's right there in the book's title. Co-sleeping, or parents sleeping with their babies. The book presents it as the global norm in agrarian societies throughout history.
It really was. And Japan serves as a compelling modern example. Co-sleeping isn't just common, it's essentially universal.
Universal, wow.
And what's remarkable is that Japan has one of the world's lowest infant mortality rates, significantly lower than the U.S., and their SIDS rates are roughly half the U.S. rate.
Which directly challenges the blanket opposition to bed sharing from the U.S. pediatric establishment, which often focuses solely on the risks without acknowledging potential benefits or the cultural context.
Right. Biologist James McKenna's research is noted here, highlighting the physiological synchronization that happens between mother and infant during co-sleeping, suggesting there might even be built-in safety features to the practice.
But in the U.S., beyond just safety fears, there's that long-standing psychological anxiety, right? Rooted in Freudian ideas that co-sleeping could somehow damage independence or lead to psychological harm related to the primal scene.
Yeah, the idea of a child witnessing parental sex, which Freud linked to later neuroses.
Uh-huh.
The book cites psychologist Paul Okami's review of studies, which found no clear evidence of pathology linked to exposure to parental nudity, sexual activity, or co-sleeping in follow-up studies.
No clear evidence.
No. He questions why, despite the lack of supporting evidence for these fears, they remain so persistent in the U.S.
That's a really good question. And in Japan, co-sleeping is deeply linked to the cultural concept of ame.
Ame, right. This isn't seen as pathological dependence, but rather a positive, normal aspect of close relationships. A kind of healthy psychological reliance that fosters interdependence.
Interdependence, not just independence.
Exactly. It's a world away from the Western emphasis on achieving early independence at all costs. So as children move out of infancy and into toddlerhood and childhood, these cultural differences continue to shape how they are raised, impacting communication, discipline, and responsibility.
Communication styles, for example, vary immensely.
Oh, hugely. In East African cultures like the Gusi and Hausa, mothers might seem less verbally engaged with infants, even questioning why talk before they can talk.
Right.
This is in stark contrast to mothers in places like Shantinagar, India, who talk almost constantly and affectionately to their babies.
So very different levels of verbal stimulation.
Yes. And studies comparing mothers in different cultures show how this affects infant interaction styles. German mothers tend to engage in longer face-to-face interactions and achieve more mutual gaze with their infants compared to Niço mothers in Cameroon,
Okay.
who have less direct face-to-face time but focus more on responsive physical contact and tactile care.
The book uses that powerful example of Maricera, a goosey mother, who
Nice.
an American observer saw as, like, self-absorbed and disengaged from her baby. But from the local goosey perspective, she was considered an adequate mother. Why?
Because her child was physically robust and healthy.
Right?
This highlights a fundamental difference in cultural priorities for child rearing. Is the primary goal physical survival and robustness? Or is it fostering emotional interaction and engagement? Both are valid goals, but they lead to very different parenting behaviors.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, discipline and learning styles also diverge. We touched on Taiwanese opportunity education and moral lecturing versus Japanese avoidance of conflict with toddlers.
Right. And Chinese parents, drawing on Confucian traditions, employ a more didactic approach, combining authority and love. Guan, Xiaoshuan.
Mhm.
They focus on training children for school success and moral virtue, often using structured learning methods like flashcards.
Which contrasts sharply with the more child-centered, sort of egalitarian approach often favored by American mothers.
Yes, very much so. And even among agrarian cultures, there are different didactic styles.
Okay.
East African mothers often use direct commands like, I talk, you do.
Okay.
While Chinese mothers might command attention for verbal instruction, I talk, you listen. Different emphasis.
Gotcha. And what about something like toilet training? That causes a lot of stress here sometimes.
Ooh, yeah. The book notes the relative anxiety and later timing of toilet training in the U.S. compared to cultures like India, where mothers might start as early as 1 month old using cues and holding the baby over a drain,
Yeah.
like saying, say.
From 1 month. Wow.
Yeah. While technology like disposable diapers and maybe a cultural preference for the child to initiate might contribute to the U.S. approach, the underlying anxiety about getting it right seems to persist.
It definitely does. Tantrums are another fascinating point of comparison. Are they universal?
Well, mothers in other cultures say toddlers have tantrums, but observers report seeing them very rarely.
So they happen, but maybe not as publicly or frequently.
Perhaps. The book includes a detailed anecdote from Palau about a 5-year-old boy having a dramatic tantrum on a path.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that one.
What's striking is the complete lack of adult reaction. The mother continues walking impassively. Passers-by just step around him. Older children watch silently from a distance. He's simply left alone until it passes.
No negotiation, no timeout, just nothing.
Nothing. The book speculates that tantrums might occur more frequently in cultures where parents play extensively with toddlers, potentially creating expectations for attention that are incompatible with the demands of adult domestic work later.
That's an interesting hypothesis.
It really makes you wonder, are American toddlers experiencing tantrums more frequently or intensely because of our specific cultural environment and parent-child interaction styles? Research based on parent reports does suggest they're very common and often lengthy at peak ages here.
Food for thought. The book also challenges another cornerstone of Western parenting, the idea of mothers raising children primarily in isolation.
Right. They describe the U.S. nuclear family structure as pretty exceptional in placing the nearly sole burden of infant and young child care on mothers with only supplemental help.
Which can feel overwhelming.
Absolutely. Globally, shared care is incredibly common and diverse. This includes cooperation among women in extended or joint families, sisters, aunts, grandmothers, all pitching in, sometimes described as socialization for interdependence, because children are constantly interacting with multiple caregivers.
Socialization for interdependence, I like that.
Older siblings frequently take on significant caregiving roles, too. The book highlights Rosa's family in rural Mexico.
The one with 7 kids.
That's the one. The older children nurture and care for the younger ones,
Yeah.
developing patience and kindness in the process.
And this practice of older siblings caring for younger ones in larger families, it directly counters the Western idea that children require exclusive, direct parental attention for healthy development.
Exactly. It explains how siblings can develop close bonds and harmony.
Yeah.
Older children gain approval by being gentle and helpful with their younger charges. It's a completely different dynamic than constant competition for parental attention.
Makes sense. What about fathers?
Fathers also play a role, though it's highly variable culturally and rarely primary for infants. Among the Nepal Brahmin Kshetri, men of all ages express great delight in young children and actively participate in care.
That's nice to hear.
Mexican men are also noted for their affectionate engagement with young children.
Okay.
And fostering and adoption within social networks are also common in regions like West Africa and the Pacific, truly embodying the idea that it takes a village. Children might spend significant time living with relatives or others outside their immediate parents.
So lots of shared responsibility.
Lots. While shared care is common, the book does note some universal patterns.
Yeah.
Adult women are almost always the primary caregivers or their substitutes.
Right.
And fathers play variable but rarely primary roles, especially for infants. No known society has men as the primary caregivers for very young children. Not yet, anyway. But this broader perspective on shared care truly underscores how the U.S. nuclear family model, while not inherently bad, places an enormous and often overwhelming burden on individual parents compared to cultures with more distributed child-rearing responsibilities.
Yeah, that really comes across. Another area where cultures differ dramatically is children's work and what's considered precocious.
Right. In many agrarian societies, children are viewed as little workers from a very young age.
Little workers.
Yeah. Toddlers might be taught simple tasks, and by 5 or 6, children in cultures like the Gusi, Maya, or Quechua take on substantial responsibilities like caring for infant siblings, fetching water, or herding animals.
Wow, real responsibilities.
Real work. This is a stark contrast to the trend in the U.S., particularly in middle-class families, where children are often relieved of most household responsibilities. Parents engage in what Loro called concerted cultivation.
Right, scheduling activity.
And doing things that children could potentially do themselves.
Yeah.
The book emphasizes that precociousness isn't just about innate intelligence. It's culturally defined.
Oh, so.
Well, they give the example of a 6-year-old Masagenka girl named Yanira, who was self-sufficient during a 5-day expedition, carrying her own gear, helping cook, taking care of herself.
At 6? That's incredible.
Incredibly precocious by Western standards, but within her culture, where self-sufficiency is learned early, it might be less remarkable. It's expected.
Okay. On the other hand,
we see a 3-year-old American girl, Ariana Lynch, who knew how to use her mom's phone to call 911 when her mother collapsed. We view that as incredibly precocious communication.
Definitely.
Enabled by our technology and perhaps parental coaching on using devices. Different kind of precocity.
Right, valued in our context.
Exactly. The book also brings back the Japanese concept of empathy, omoyari, as a form of cultural precocity.
Ah, yes, empathy.
Japanese children are often attuned to others' feelings from an early age, reinforced by cultural practices. Remember the example of mothers encouraging a child to finish eating by appealing to the feelings of the food itself.
Yeah, the vegetable will be sad if you don't eat it.
Right. This is a form of moral inculcation, teaching children to consider the feelings of others and find their place within a group, which is maybe distinct from a more Western focus on, say, asserting one's will or building individual confidence.
It's a different emphasis again.
The authors propose that young children's precocious abilities in different areas really reflect their parents' priorities and the specific cultural routines they are being primed for. Parents use the influence they have over infants and toddlers to guide them towards culturally valued behaviors and goals.
But this leads to a crucial, perhaps slightly unsettling question raised by the book. Does this early parental priming actually last? Does it stick?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They acknowledge that, yes, early priming does shape young children's behavior and capabilities in specific ways, making them precocious in skills valued by their culture, whether that's compliance, empathy, or task responsibility.
Okay, so it works in the short term.
It seems to. However, they express skepticism about the longevity of this early influence on overall psychological traits or long-term outcomes.
Why the skepticism?
Because as children get older, they are exposed to a rapidly expanding world of influences. Peers, school, community members, initiation ceremonies, broader media. These environments can significantly dilute or even counteract early parental influence.
Right. The world gets bigger.
Much bigger. And factors like brain changes during adolescence and the increasing power of identity tied to peer groups and broader social structures further challenge the idea that early parent-child interactions rigidly determine long-term psychological outcomes.
So it's not set in stone from age 3.
The book concludes that better evidence is needed to prove such enduring preservation of psychological dispositions formed in infancy and early childhood.
Again, this reinforces the idea that children are perhaps more resilient and adaptable.
Exactly.
And their development is shaped by a wider ecosystem of influences than some expert theories solely focused on the earliest years might suggest.
That seems to be the argument, yeah. So let's bring this back to you, the listener, especially if you're navigating the often anxiety-filled world of parenting in a Western context. What does all this cross-cultural exploration mean?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
Well, the core application, the message kind of hinted at of the book's title, is that maybe, just maybe, American families could benefit from relaxing a bit.
Relaxing. Tell me more.
The immense variation in effective parenting styles around the world, driven by diverse histories, cultures, and economic realities, strongly suggests there isn't one single, universally mandated right way to parent based on psychological rules.
So there's more than one way to raise a healthy, happy kid.
It certainly seems that way. Looking at successful alternative models from modern societies like Japan's universal co-sleeping with low SIDS rates or the less labor-intensive didactic approach of some Chinese mothers that effectively cultivates compliance, well, it can provide a wider perspective.
Understanding these alternatives helps contextualize our own practices. It can potentially reduce the anxiety fueled by narrow expert advice and the societal pressure towards intensive parenting or concerted cultivation.
Exactly. The evidence presented in the book suggests children are remarkably resilient and are shaped by a vast range of factors beyond just the specific psychological inputs from their parents in the earliest years.
Which could be quite freeing for parents.
It could be. This perspective can potentially, it shifts the focus from finding the one right answer to appreciating the diversity and adaptability inherent in both child development and human cultural practices.
So as we wrap up this exploration, the main takeaway is clear. Parenthood is a dynamic, culturally shaped role, varying dramatically across time and place. It's driven by history, culture, and practical needs, not just universal psychology. This challenges the notion of a single ideal parenting style and highlights children's remarkable resilience and adaptability.
Well put. And here's a final thought for you to carry forward, drawn from the questions this book raises. If the precocious abilities we see in children reflect their culture's priorities and the environments they're exposed to,
Yeah.
what are our current cultural priorities in the U.S. implicitly priming our children for? Are those the traits and values we truly want to cultivate?
That's a deep question.
Or maybe looking at it another way, if the early years are less rigidly determinative than some experts claim, what does that potentially liberate us to do as parents? And perhaps, what does it allow children to discover and develop for themselves?